Have you ever wondered how a single decision, a single spark of creativity, could change the way millions of people handle their money? Or how one moment, in the quiet hours of the night, could rob the world of someone who helped shape the very technology we use every day? The story of Bob Lee is exactly that kind of tale, filled with bright success and sudden tragedy. It is the story of a man who was both a dreamer and a builder, a person who believed software could solve some of life's biggest problems, yet whose own life came to a tragic, unexpected end on the streets of San Francisco. He was known to friends by a spirited nickname, Crazy Bob, which captured his adventurous spirit. He was someone whose code powered some of the most popular apps on our phones, and whose ideas about innovation, progress, and community left a mark that would remain even after he was gone. Bob Lee's journey began in St. Louis, Missouri, on December 20th, 1979. Born into a family that encouraged curiosity, Bob spent his early years taking apart everything he could get his hands on. Whether it was an old radio, a broken computer, or random pieces of electronics found in the garage, he wanted to see how they worked. His parents noticed that he had a knack for math and puzzles, often finding him deep in thought over a book of brain teasers or fiddling with bits of code he wrote on a school computer. As a child, Bob was not afraid to stand out. He had a shock of energy that seemed to power every move he made, and that trait, an almost boundless enthusiasm, would earn him the nickname that followed him for the rest of his life. He was not an only child, either. He had a brother, Tim Oliver Lee, with whom he shared a playful but competitive rivalry. The two often challenged each other to see who could solve a puzzle faster or come up with the wildest computer programs. Bob thrived on competition, and that energy became part of his identity. As he entered Lindbergh High School, he dove into extracurriculars like water polo, a sport he played with fierce passion. Teammates said he burned more calories than anyone in the pool, roaring and cheering whenever his team scored. Whether he was in the water or typing away on a computer, Bob displayed the same unrelenting enthusiasm that spurred his peers to call him Crazy Bob. But it was not just sports and socializing that occupied his mind. In a show of his technical talents, Bob wrote a 3D rendering engine in Turbo Pascal while he was still in high school. Most teenagers were juggling homework and after-school jobs, but Bob was crafting software that pushed the limits of what personal computers of that era could do. Some people thought he was a genius. Others simply found him eccentric. Bob, for his part, loved the process of creation, the art of turning lines of code into something functional, something that opened a new window into virtual worlds. His teachers realized they were dealing with someone who would not just follow in others' footsteps. He would blaze his own trail. During his late teenage years, Bob chose to attend Southeast Missouri State University. It was a place where he hoped to continue expanding his understanding of both coding and the larger world. There, he pledged the Sigma Chi fraternity, meeting people who would remain his friends for years to come. His social life was vibrant, filled with late-night discussions about technology, the future, and the merits of open-source software. Yet, true to form, Bob also managed to hold down a job as a web developer for the university. Whenever a new challenge arose, say, a bug in the system or a need for a new website feature, Bob would dive headfirst into the problem, sometimes coding until the sun crept up over the horizon. It was in August 2001 that Bob made a bigger name for himself in the tech community by releasing a free program to defend Microsoft IIS servers from Code Red, a rapidly spreading computer worm that threatened major systems worldwide. While many security experts were frantically trying to contain the worm, Bob was at the forefront, devising a protective measure and offering it at no cost. This act showcased not only his technical skills, but also a certain generosity of spirit, a willingness to share solutions with others without focusing on profit. He believed that if you had the ability to fix a problem, you did it, and you let the entire community benefit. By the early 2000s, Bob was shifting gears. He took a job at AT&T as a technical architect, expanding his knowledge of large-scale systems and enterprise-level software. While there, he developed an aspect-oriented programming (AOP) framework known as Dynop, which found itself compared to the Spring framework for Java. For a young professional, having your work featured in Oracle magazine was a pretty big deal. It confirmed that the tech industry was beginning to notice his contributions. And Bob, ever the restless spirit, was far from done. He still had so much more to give, so many more ideas swirling in his mind. By October 2004, he embarked on a new chapter in his career, joining Google as a staff software engineer. At the time, Google was evolving into a global powerhouse, known for its search engine but also pushing into every corner of the internet and technology. Bob was placed on the Android development team. Back then, Android was in its infancy, a concept that aspired to revolutionize how people interacted with their phones. Bob found himself among a group of passionate developers whose dream was to turn clunky cell phones into powerful mini-computers, running apps that people could not yet imagine. Bob's job was to help build the foundation, the code that would enable that dream to become a reality. While at Google, Bob co-authored GICE, a dependency injection framework, with a colleague named Kevin Burillian. For those outside the programming world, dependency injection might sound like a vague and technical term, but inside the realm of software, it is a major approach to structuring code so that different pieces remain flexible, testable, and efficient. GICE was lauded as innovative, and in 2008, Bob and Kevin won a prestigious Jolt Award for their work. This recognition further solidified Bob's standing in the tech world. He was not just a coder. He was an inventor of new ways to build software, someone who saw solutions where others saw only complexity. Bob also worked on Apache Struts, Dalvik, the virtual machine used by Android, and even contributed to discussions about Java's future direction. He joined expert groups that debated adding Lambda expressions and concurrency to the language, shaping how millions of developers would write code for years to come. In many ways, Bob was becoming one of those essential voices in tech, the sort of person whose name came up in open source circles, whose code was used by countless developers, and whose imprint was left on the daily experience of smartphone users everywhere. In January 2010, Bob decided to embark on yet another adventure. He was recruited by Square, a startup that had begun to make waves by turning smartphones into credit card readers for small businesses. Founded by Jack Dorsey and Jim McKelvey, Square was still finding its footing, but it held a bold promise: to simplify and democratize financial transactions, allowing even small-scale vendors to accept credit card payments. Bob threw himself into his new role, quickly rising to become the company's chief technology officer. Under his leadership, Square's Android app flourished, and eventually Bob stepped in to develop the iOS version as well. It was during his time at Square that Bob would contribute to something particularly game-changing: the creation of Cash App, initially known as Square Cash. Though it started as a simple money transfer service, it grew into one of the most widely used financial apps in America, enabling people to send money to friends, pay for services, and even invest. As with his earlier projects, Bob's fingerprints were all over the underlying architecture and user experience. He cared deeply about building software that was easy to use and which served a real need. This was not technology for technology's sake. It was technology that gave regular people more control over their money. By 2014, after helping Square develop its brand and its defining products, Bob decided it was time to explore new horizons. With some success and money under his belt, he began investing in tech startups, looking for bright founders with big ideas. He backed projects like Clubhouse, SpaceX, and Figma, each of which went on to become significant players in their respective fields. Bob had a knack for spotting talent and was enthusiastic about helping others grow their visions. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he even pitched in to help the World Health Organization with its app, showing once again his core principle: if he could help, he would. Eventually, Bob found his way to MobileCoin, a cryptocurrency payment firm that sought to make digital transactions faster, more secure, and more private. He became the company's chief product officer in 2021. Crypto, for Bob, represented the next frontier in financial technology, another step toward making money as seamless and borderless as the internet itself. He was optimistic about what blockchain-based currencies could offer, and for him, it was an extension of the work he had been doing for years, using technology to empower everyday people. Bob's life was not just defined by his career. He had polydactyly, meaning extra fingers, which were surgically removed when he was young. It was a physical quirk that occasionally came up in conversation, a reminder that everyone has something that makes them unique. He also had a complicated personal life, having married and started a family, but separating from his wife, Krista, in 2019. The couple had 2 children, and despite the end of their marriage, he wanted to remain a strong presence in his kids' lives. When his mother passed away, Bob's father moved to Mill Valley, California, to be closer to the family, and in October 2022, while his children stayed in the Bay Area, Bob relocated to Miami with his dad. But his connection to San Francisco, the city that had been the backdrop for some of his greatest accomplishments, was far from over. All this set the stage for the early hours of April 4, 2023, a day that would leave a deep scar on San Francisco and the tech community. Bob found himself in the Rincon Hill neighborhood, a place known for its modern high-rises and bay views. Though the city was often romanticized for its rolling hills and Golden Gate Bridge, Bob was also aware that San Francisco, like any large urban area, had shadows lurking in its corners. At 2:35 a.m., the local police received a call about a stabbing on the 300 block of Main Street. When they arrived, they found Bob unconscious, bleeding profusely. CCTV footage would later show him stumbling to a car with its hazard lights on, lifting his shirt to reveal his wound, only for the car to drive away. He managed to make a desperate call to 911, asking for help dozens of times in a matter of seconds. But by the time an ambulance rushed him to the hospital, it was too late. Bob, just 43 years old, succumbed to his injuries. News of Bob's death hit like a thunderbolt. Within hours, social media was ablaze with speculation, tributes, and sorrow. People who knew him personally described him as a giant heart, someone who was always ready to talk through new ideas or lend a helping hand. The city of San Francisco found itself at the center of a media storm. Critics pointed to rising crime rates and questioned whether the city's progressive policies had contributed to a sense of lawlessness. Friends and fellow entrepreneurs grieved the loss of a brilliant mind, but they also worried for their own safety, wondering if the city they had helped build into a tech hub was no longer safe. An autopsy performed by the San Francisco Medical Examiner confirmed that Bob had died from knife wounds to his heart and lung. The report also noted traces of alcohol, cocaine, and ketamine in his system, which sparked different interpretations. Some concluded he had been out partying that night, possibly vulnerable to unexpected danger. Others argued it should not matter, because nothing could justify the violence he had suffered. Regardless of the speculation, the fact remained: a father, a brother, and a friend to many had been taken away in a senseless act of violence. The San Francisco Police Department sprang into action, combing through CCTV footage, analyzing digital evidence, and interviewing anyone who might have crossed paths with Bob that night. By April 13th, SFPD announced they had arrested a suspect, Nima Momeni, a 38-year-old tech professional who lived in Emeryville. Rumors swirled about whether Bob and Nima had known each other, and if so, why a simple acquaintance would escalate into such a horrific act. People wanted answers, but the police were tight-lipped as the investigation moved forward, focusing on building a strong case. As more details emerged, the story grew even more complex. Nima Momeni was an immigrant from Tehran, Iran, who had come to the United States as a teenager, fleeing a difficult home life. He had been working in technology since 2005, operating an IT consulting firm that had been struggling. There were suggestions that Momeni knew Bob. Perhaps the two had connected through the tech scene, which, despite its size, often feels like a small world where everyone is just a few degrees of separation from everyone else. Investigators discovered surveillance video from the Millennium Tower condo of Momeni's sister, Kazar, showing Bob and Nima leaving at around 2 a.m. on the night of the murder. The footage showed them getting into Momeni's BMW, then later stepping out by the Bay Bridge, an area that was deserted at that hour. It soon came to light that there might have been personal matters involved, especially involving Nima's sister. Word leaked that Bob might have had a casual relationship with Kazar, and that Momeni had confronted him earlier that evening, upset about whether Bob was engaging in behavior he considered inappropriate or harmful to his sister's marriage. At trial, Nima Momeni testified that his sister had an open marriage with her husband, a plastic surgeon, though the swirl of rumors and partial truths made it hard to separate fact from speculation. It was reported that Bob had attended parties with Kazar and engaged in recreational drug use, none of which suggested any reason for violence, but it perhaps hinted at a dynamic that had become volatile. During the investigation, it was also alleged that Bob had dated Momeni's ex-girlfriend 3 years prior. This detail added another layer of intrigue and confusion. Did personal jealousy or resentment play a role? Police were not certain. What was clear, however, was that on that early morning, after a tense conversation, Momeni drove Bob to a secluded spot and inflicted a fatal wound with a knife. Once Bob stumbled away, desperately seeking help, Momeni vanished into the night, leaving the city in shock when the sun rose. As the investigation moved forward, new details surfaced. Officers learned that Momeni's sister, Kazar, had also faced some legal trouble, including an arrest for driving under the influence, though the charges were later dismissed. Detectives found that Kazar's husband had Googled how to erase an iPhone soon after Bob's murder, which raised suspicions about possible tampering or an attempt to cover up digital traces. But SFPD was never able to access the full contents of Kazar's phones, leaving significant portions of the puzzle unsolved. By the time the trial finally began, tension was at a boiling point. The case had become a symbol for so many issues: crime in big cities, the secrets that sometimes lurk behind glamorous social scenes, and the enormous power that personal jealousy or resentment can wield. The public wanted justice, especially those in the tech community who saw Bob as a hero of innovation. They watched closely as prosecutors laid out their evidence: the surveillance footage, text messages, and phone calls. On the defense side, attorneys argued that Nima's actions were not premeditated but stemmed from a chaotic confrontation. They painted him as a man who, despite a troubled background and personal struggles, had not intended to commit murder. The jury took 7 days to deliberate. Every piece of evidence was weighed. In the end, they returned a guilty verdict of second-degree murder on December 17, 2024. Nima Momeni was now facing 15 years to life in prison. The city that had once been enthralled with the bright lights of the tech boom now found itself in a more somber mood, forced to confront the human cost of one of its darkest nights. Outside the courthouse, reporters captured footage of Momini's mother, visibly emotional, telling cameras that her son had never done anything wrong before that fatal moment. There were suggestions he had a history of drug abuse, and she maintained that something had driven him over the edge that night. Whatever the reasons, the trial's outcome made it clear that a man's life had been taken, and the justice system held Momini accountable for that act. For Bob's family, his father, his brother Tim, and his 2 children, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but no real relief from the grief of having lost a loved one. Some of Bob's longtime friends reflected on the fact that if not for that one fateful encounter, he might still be here, coding away, investing in new startups, and pushing forward innovative ideas. People who had only known him by reputation were equally stunned, recalling that behind every piece of technology is a real person, with hopes and dreams that can be cut short by violence. In the months that followed, many in San Francisco's tech world gathered to pay tribute to Bob's life. They organized small hackathons in his memory, writing lines of code dedicated to his spirit of giving. Speakers at these events told stories of Crazy Bob, the playful water polo player who wrote 3D engines in high school and once single-handedly tackled a dangerous computer worm. They remembered how, at Google, he had been pivotal to the success of Android, quietly writing code that would one day run on billions of devices. They joked about how he was the best kind of perfectionist, always on the hunt for more elegant, more efficient ways to solve problems, and never too proud to accept suggestions from a junior engineer. The city itself, battered by the pandemic and a rising number of high-profile crimes, found in Bob's death a painful reflection of its own struggles. Some tech workers wondered if it was time to leave the Bay Area. Others pledged to stay and fight for a safer environment, to push city leaders to address homelessness, drug addiction, and mental health in a more effective way. For better or worse, Bob's murder had become part of a larger conversation about how to balance the city's progressive ideals with the reality that violence and danger lurked in certain areas. Meanwhile, on a more personal level, Bob's close friends and family clung to the memories they shared with him. They thought of the times he would come over for a barbecue, talk for hours about the future of financial technology, or show off a new open-source project that he swore would change the way people used their phones. They remembered the times he took his kids to the park, explaining to them in child-friendly terms what cryptocurrency was, or how an app like Cash App could move money from one phone to another. Some recalled how he dealt with adversity or conflict, never with anger, but rather with a determination to find a solution. It was that spirit, they said, that made him such a good engineer. He refused to accept that any problem was unsolvable. The subject of polydactyly sometimes came up in these memories too. He would show people the faint scars on his hands where his extra fingers had been removed, shrugging and smiling at how life hands us all different starting points. But that small physical difference served as a metaphor for him. He liked to say that we all have invisible, extra parts, unique gifts that can set us apart. He challenged everyone to find theirs and use them for good. This reflection on uniqueness and destiny was especially meaningful to those who had worked closely with him, as they recognized Bob's life was all about uncovering hidden potential, whether in code, in business, or in people. Some co-workers at Square, who had once labored alongside Bob on the original versions of Cash App, felt a bittersweet pang every time they opened the app on their phones. It was a living testament to his genius and his drive to democratize finance. The user interface might have evolved, but the backbone, the fundamental architecture, was still very much Bob's handiwork. Every time a user sent a few dollars to a friend for coffee, they were, in a way, interacting with a piece of Bob's legacy. The broader public, too, began to learn more about Bob's contributions to technology. Articles and documentaries popped up, retelling the story of how he had coded from a young age, saved servers from the code redworm, and created open-source tools that formed the bedrock of many Java-based systems. People discovered that every time they used an Android phone, some part of Bob's work was in there, quietly enabling the phone to run apps or connect to the internet. And every time they typed importcom.google.inject in a piece of Java code, they were using the framework Bob had co-created. As time passed, the city of San Francisco went through its usual routines: civic debates, elections, new businesses opening, old ones closing. But the memory of Bob's murder remained raw. In some ways, it was a symbol of how random and cruel life could be, how even the best among us could be cut down in a moment of darkness. In other ways, it was a call to action. Tech leaders banded together to lobby the city government for better policing, better street lighting, better mental health services. They recognized that preserving the city's vibrant culture and entrepreneurial energy meant tackling the conditions that led to crimes like Bob's stabbing. Meanwhile, Bob's father, living in Miami after having moved with his son, wrestled with an emptiness that was impossible to fill. He had moved to be closer to Bob, to share in the sunshine of Florida's beaches, perhaps to enjoy a quieter life. Instead, he found himself living with an ache that he could not fully articulate. People close to him said he handled his grief with quiet dignity, often speaking about his son's accomplishments, how proud he was of everything Bob had done. Bob's children, who remained in the Bay Area with their mother, faced the difficulty of growing up without their dad. They remembered him as the man who taught them how to hold a phone, how to set up simple websites, and how to solve problems by breaking them down into smaller pieces, just as he did when coding. Teachers, friends, and other parents in the neighborhood rallied around them, offering support and love, forming a small community determined to ensure they never forgot who their father was and what he had contributed to the world. The trial that ended on December 17, 2024, with Nima Momeni's guilty verdict, was closely watched by both local residents and the wider tech community. Some felt the conviction was the only path to justice. Others pitied Momeni, who had arrived in the United States with hopes for a better life, only to unravel into chaos and violence. Momeni's mother spoke publicly about her son's earlier struggles, maintaining that he was essentially good, but got lost in a storm of personal issues. While her grief was genuine, it could not erase the fact that he had ended a life that meant so much to so many people. As Momeni faced his sentence of 15 years to life in prison, San Francisco District Attorney's Office released a statement highlighting the tragedy of losing someone like Bob Lee. They pointed out that crimes of passion, especially those entangled in personal drama, can lead to irreversible consequences. They urged the community to continue nurturing open dialogue about conflict resolution, mental health, and the importance of seeking help rather than turning to violence. In some corners, people debated whether the city needed more stringent sentencing laws for violent crimes. Others argued that the focus should be on preventing people from reaching the point of violence in the first place, by offering counseling, community support, and interventions. In the midst of these conversations, some of Bob's friends in the tech industry made sure his memory lived on in more concrete ways. They set up small scholarships in his name, aimed at encouraging young programmers who demonstrated both technical prowess and a desire to make the world a better place. After all, Bob had built free tools to stop the spread of viruses, contributed to open-source software, and constantly championed solutions for the common good. If future coders could be inspired by that spirit, they reasoned, then Bob's legacy would continue shaping the digital landscape in positive ways. His father worked with local organizations to create meetups that honored Bob's Crazy Bob energy. These gatherings were reminiscent of the hackathons Bob loved, places where coders would stay up all night, subsisting on pizza and coffee, brainstorming ways to solve various problems. Whether it was designing new features for a non-profit's website or tinkering with early-stage cryptocurrency solutions, participants arrived ready to innovate. And in their quiet or light-hearted moments, they would share stories about Bob, how he once coded entire modules of a program overnight, how he believed wholeheartedly in the open-source philosophy, and how he never let cynics discourage him. But of course, life in the Bay Area rolled on. New startups emerged, some soared to success, others fizzled out. Rents continued to climb in certain neighborhoods, even as remote work persisted for many. The skyline changed bit by bit, with new buildings rising while older ones were torn down. Yet in pockets of the city, Bob's memory was a powerful undercurrent. From coffee shops near the Square headquarters to neighborhoods where tech workers lived, people would still mention him when the topic turned to forging new paths in financial technology. For some who had never met Bob, but had read about his life, he became a symbol of everything that was both wonderful and tragic about the tech industry. Wonderful because it fosters people who truly can change the world. Someone from the Midwest who could help create an app that made billions of financial transactions easier for everyday folks. Tragic because in a city bursting with energy and creativity, there were still places where a person could face sudden, senseless violence. They wondered if Bob's story might serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one is invincible, that success and fame do not shield us from harm. Those closest to him hoped that people would not only remember the circumstances of his death, but also the incredible tapestry of his life. They wanted to emphasize that Bob was a devoted father, a builder of software, a friend to many, and a champion of open collaboration. They recalled nights in the Square office when he would roam between desks, offering ideas to solve a bug or to refine a user interface. He cared deeply about user experience, about making technology simple and intuitive. It was never enough just to make something functional. Bob insisted it had to be beautiful in its own way, a reflection of the dedication behind it. As the year 2025 approached, the tech world had moved on to fresh challenges. New programming languages, new tools, new debates about privacy and encryption. But in certain circles, Bob's name remained a rallying point. People proposed Bob Lee Days, hackathons dedicated to building philanthropic apps in his honor. Each time, a new wave of participants discovered who he was, learned about his roles at Google and Square, and marveled at how many different technologies he had touched. They learned about how a single engineer could influence the day-to-day habits of millions, from sending money to a friend for a shared lunch bill to making secure payments to a vendor at a farmer's market. And they felt a sense of sadness that someone who had achieved so much was no longer there to see where the tech world would go next. At the same time, families in San Francisco had countless dinner table discussions about the safety of the city. Parents told their children to be extra cautious, reminding them not to walk alone in dimly lit areas at night. Some activists argued that focusing on crime might overshadow the good things about the city, like its culture of acceptance and innovation, but others pointed to Bob's murder as evidence that more needed to be done to keep residents and visitors safe. It was a tension that never found an easy resolution. The city was both a land of opportunity and a place where heartbreak could happen at any moment. For the Lee family, commemorating Bob's birthday became an emotional ritual. Every December 20th, they gathered to share pictures and videos of him. Footage of him splashing in a swimming pool as a teenager, or highlights from a talk he gave at a tech conference, where he exuded that crazy Bob enthusiasm. Sometimes, they would watch interviews where Bob discussed the future of finance, seeing the glimmer in his eye when he talked about how technology could unify people across continents. The family found some comfort in hearing his voice, in remembering that sense of hope he always carried. They also found solace in how the world continued to speak about Bob's achievements. Journalists revisited his role in building Cash App, describing how it had transformed from a simple peer-to-peer payment tool into a multifaceted platform for banking, investing, and more. Some even wrote mini-biographies highlighting Bob's contributions to Android and open-source projects, explaining in layman's terms the significance of his engineering solutions. Each article, each documentary, felt like a small monument erected in Bob's memory. In the realm of law and justice, the outcome of Nima Momani's trial gave prosecutors and public defenders alike fodder for reflection. They debated how to better handle cases where personal entanglements escalated into violence. They wondered if there had been warning signs, if an intervention could have saved Bob's life. But in the end, the consensus was that crimes of this nature often defy neat explanations. No matter how advanced a society's technology or how thorough its legal system, tragedies can still strike when emotions are high and reason is fleeting. Through all of this, the essence of Bob Lee remained intertwined with the technology he helped create. Even years later, a random user in a small town could open Cash App on their phone to pay for groceries, oblivious to the fact that the app's functionality owed much to a man who had poured his heart into building it. Or a coder might import GEIS into their Java project, never pausing to think about the real person who had fought for elegant code design so they could have this tool at their fingertips. In that way, Bob's story continued to unfold, woven into the fabric of modern life, a quiet testament to how a single mind can shape vast, interconnected systems. Sometimes, friends would marvel at how Bob had crammed so many different lives into just 43 years. He had gone from being a young programmer who fought off a global computer worm to a Google engineer shaping the future of mobile devices, then from a Square CTO revolutionizing digital payments to an early investor in rising stars of the tech world. Along the way, he was a father, a brother, a friend, and an eternal enthusiast. He believed in giving back, whether by releasing free software or by helping coordinate a non-profits app during a global crisis. His father, in the quiet of a Miami evening, might look out over the water and replay memories of Bob's youthful grin, seeing in his mind's eye the boy who used to tinker with code until dawn. Perhaps he would recall how Bob once joked that code was like magic, lines typed on a screen that could do anything if the programmer was clever enough. That magic was Bob's gift to the world, but it was also part of what made losing him so hard to accept. Because if the son was so capable of creating new possibilities in software, one wished he could have also conjured a shield against the cruelty that found him that April night. Time, as it does, moved forward. The trial receded from the headlines, overshadowed by fresh crises, new breakthroughs, and the unending cycle of news that characterizes our modern age. Yet for those who loved Bob, the clock stayed frozen in many ways on April 4, 2023. They lived on, but a piece of their hearts remained anchored to that date, to that early morning hour. Life became a tapestry of before and after, with the dividing line marked by the last time they heard Bob's voice, saw his smile, or received a late-night text from him about some new idea or excitement. As the years rolled on, every December 20th came to represent a promise to remember not just how Bob died, but how he lived, fearlessly, creatively, and with a boundless passion for solving problems. Friends wrote blog posts in his honor, colleagues dedicated lines of code to him. Families in the tech community used his story to teach their children about the fragility of life. Bob's Code Day events multiplied, drawing bigger crowds each time. Young coders heard the stories and felt an odd kinship with someone they had never met, drawn in by the sheer scope of what he accomplished. In that sense, Bob lived on through each new generation of innovators who believed that software was a force for good. Looking back, one could say Bob Lee's life was a testament to what happens when talent meets determination, when generosity meets curiosity. It was a life that proved that an engineer from the Midwest could leave a colossal mark on Silicon Valley, that open-source tools could bring recognition and accolades, and that a single well-timed app could alter the way society handles money. But it was also a life that ended in heartbreak, a sharp reminder that even visionary founders and accomplished technologists are vulnerable to everyday dangers like any of us. No matter how advanced we become, how high our skyscrapers reach, or how sophisticated our software grows, we remain fragile beings who can be undone in a single night by the blade of another person's anger. Yet there is hope in the way Bob's story is told. People cling to the encouraging chapters, the ones where he leapt from job to job, project to project, always leaving behind something better than what he found. They think of the open-source contributions that remain free for anyone to use, the financial tools that let a friend pay back a debt without hassle, the simpler hospital or non-profit forms that might have come from a chance piece of code Bob contributed. Even beyond the city that claimed his life, Bob's influence spread across the globe, present anywhere an Android phone was booted up or a Java developer typed at inject. Some might say that if Bob was still here, he would be on the cusp of yet another breakthrough, perhaps leading a wave of improvements in cryptocurrency or helping governments adopt more transparent financial systems. It's hard to say, but his legacy reminds us that progress in technology is not just about big companies or big money. It's about individuals with a spark of an idea and the willingness to put in the hours to make it real. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and the belief that problems can be fixed if we come together to solve them. As for Nima Momeni, his name is linked forever to a crime he cannot take back, a single choice that ended one life and altered many others. His future, for at least the next 15 years, and likely much more, lay behind prison walls. Whether he ever found a sense of remorse or sought redemption was a question the public largely left unasked as attention turned elsewhere. Whatever personal struggles or resentments he harbored, the court found him responsible for crossing a line that no one should cross. Late at night, when the glow of screens illuminates homes where people code, chat, and brainstorm their next big idea, there might be a moment of pause, a fleeting thought of Bob Lee, the fearless programmer who dedicated his talents to making technology accessible to everyone. For some, it might serve as motivation to carry on his spirit of openness, generosity, and problem-solving. For others, it's a caution. Behind every screen is a human heart, and we must care for each other if we want our communities to thrive. Ultimately, Bob Lee's story is one of promise, persistence, and the unpredictability of life. Born in St. Louis, bursting with energy, he wrote a 3D engine in high school and then soared through the ranks of major tech companies, leaving behind a trail of innovation and goodwill. Yet, in a twist that no one saw coming, he lost his life on a quiet street in the early hours, calling for help that would not arrive in time. The heartbreak left in his wake was matched only by the admiration and gratitude expressed by those who benefited from his work. And so we are left with a complex legacy, at once an inspiration and a warning, a shining example of what passion can achieve, and a somber reminder of how fragile we all are in the grand scheme of things. Perhaps that's the bittersweet lesson Bob Lee leaves us with, to chase our dreams with the boundless enthusiasm he embodied, but also to hold each other close, never forgetting that the world can turn dark when we least expect it. He showed us that bold thinking and an unyielding spirit can change the course of technology, and that an act of senseless violence can cut that spirit short. Yet Bob's code remains, a testament to his intellect. His children grow older, a testament to his love, and his memory stands as a testament to a life lived at full throttle. If we carry forward even a fraction of his drive and optimism, then Crazy Bob will continue to shape our world, line by line, app by app, and dream by dream.